Welcome to today's webcast. This call is being recorded. And now, to begin the program, I'd like to introduce Mr. Chris Flack. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, Jenny. Thank you so much, and welcome everybody in our audience to today's webcast, taking your VMware Monitoring and Capacity Management to the next level, sponsored by Uptime Software. I'm Chris Flack with Redmond Magazine, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for today's event, so thank you all in the audience for joining us. Just a few quick things before I get started with today's webcast and hand it over to our presenter. We will have a Q&A at the end of our presenter's presentation. However, we encourage you at any time during the presentation to ask your question via the Ask a Question box appearing on the left-hand side of your console. And hopefully, if time permits, we'll get to everybody's questions and supply some answers. Also, today's webcast is being archived for future viewing and listening purposes. And we'll send you a link within 24 to 48 hours after today's webcast where you can view the replay. You could feel free to share that link with coworkers or friends or others who may be interested on today's topic as well. So feel free to do that, and we appreciate it. Joining us for today's webcast, we have a really great presenter. His name is David Leith, and he is the product manager for Uptime Software. Along with being the Uptime guru, David brings 15 years management experience in technology, client services, and military environments. In his 9 years with Uptime Software, he has worked closely with users in hundreds of data centers across the world, helping them improve special delivery by building effective monitoring and capacity management processes. And with that, I'm going to hand over today's webcast to David so he can get started with his presentation. So David, my good friend, why don't you take the floor?
Thank you very much, Chris, and I'd like to personally thank everyone for attending today. I'm very excited to be here to talk to you about taking your VMware Monitoring Capacity Management to the next level. And today what I'm going to be talking about is something that I talked to a number of our users about when we first are introduced to their data centers. Right? So typically, when I first meet a potential user, about 70% of them fall into a certain bucket of user. Right? So in their VMware environment, they're using kind of a collection of tools to monitor their applications, right? So specifically, they're using vCenter to monitor their VMware environment, and they're using a handful of other tools to do server monitoring and capacity management across all the different silos. So via the network team, database team, application teams, physical servers. Right, and what I like to do with these people is have a conversation about how they can really do a little bit better. Right? So I'd like to talk about 3 ideas that can help organizations that fit into this bucket really improve their service delivery and at the end of the day, reduce costs of their monitoring and IT infrastructure. So I'm going to talk today about how to move beyond VMware's native monitoring tool, so the vCenter tool. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how to simplify the whole problem of VMware Capacity Management. And I'm going to move on to how to proactively move from a reactive to proactive model of managing incidents in your VMware environment. So the first piece, step 1, VMware native monitoring. Anytime I'm introduced to a user or potential client, I always have the conversation with them about vCenter, right? So without fail, people are using vCenter to monitor their VMware environment. And they always ask, what's the problem with vCenter monitoring? And it's a great question, right? Because many organizations out there are perfectly content to use vCenter for all the deep metrics and day-to-day monitoring of their VMware environment. But when it comes down to it, vCenter just simply isn't enough to help move your service delivery forward and help ensure that you're delivering quality applications to your end user. So I like to use 3 simple questions to kind of demonstrate this problem. So the first question, how do I relate virtual performance to business goals? Unfortunately, vCenter provides a very VMware-centric view of the data center, right? So it is the expert tool at just the VMware environment. But it really gives you no link between your VM performance, your vSphere performance, and actual service delivery. And that can be a very fundamental gap to really improving the service delivery in your environment. If you're only focused on that little slice of the whole application stack, so you've got the front-end servers, again, the application, network, database, storage, if all you're focusing on is VMware, it really becomes problematic to actually troubleshoot any real problems across these silos to move actual delivery upstream, right? So to prove back to the business that the services you're delivering are of high quality and frankly IT is providing the value it needs to improve that service delivery. right? So without having something that allows you to easily troubleshoot across all the silos, you end up with a lot of finger pointing, right? So the network team will blame the server team blames the application team, so on and so forth. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, what that leads to is really not a lot of forward progress, really not a lot of improvement at the end of the day, just a lot of politicking around who's responsible for the certain problems happening in your environment. And the third question I ask, and it sounds kind of a funny question, but how do I handle time travel? Something that vCenter does not do very well is provide long-term capacity planning metrics that you can use for solving that capacity problem in the future. It's also very bad for what I call lost data and blind spots. And let me give you a great example. So of course, VMware environments are highly dynamic. When VMs are motioned between different physical vSphere servers, when they're moved across resource pools or to different clusters, the history of where that VM has been and the performance metrics that go with it in vCenter are traditionally lost, or at least lost in the details. And it makes it nearly impossible to go back in time and look at something like an application rollout that happened a few weeks ago and say, we had a performance problem. What were the actual VMs contributing to that problem? Where were they sitting, and what were the hosts that were involved? With vCenter, it's very, very difficult to get to that data and use it in a meaningful way to actually solve problems. So how do we do it a little bit better? Right, so how do we go from an environment in the VMware world where you're purely using vCenter for the VMware-specific components? Doing it better is really all about escaping your silos, right? So instead of having those individual tools across each silo, you want to basically focus on monitoring at the IT service level, right? So let's take a very simple IT service. Maybe it's a corporate website. Again, very traditionally, you'd have different teams responsible for different tiers of that application. But at the end of the day, the user, the consumer, really doesn't care about the individual tiers of that application. All they care about is the actual service level is being delivered to them. So within your IT organization, you need to start shifting the focus from individual silos to that whole service level and focus on delivery at that level. To do that, I always recommend having a unified monitoring platform across all application components. Right? So get out of these silos of individual teams with individual tools and try to find a unified tool that will make it much, much easier to identify root cause across different silos, right? Particularly around topology failures or dependencies across silos. Find a tool that will make it easy to view all of that information from one location. Right? Have a centralized place for alerting and status dashboards. So there'd be nothing better to an IT organization to be able to produce a dashboard for the administrators and the IT managers saying, here's the status of our critical business applications, but then also show that status dashboard to the actual end user, the consumer. You want to get yourself to a tooling level where you're able to provide that back to the business. Right? You also want a unified platform that gives you a consistent performance database, so something that can hold more than a year's worth of data and allow you to run consistent, quick reports that are aware of all of those dynamic changes in the VMware environment and can ensure that the data you're looking at from 6 months ago is actually relevant and actually holds real, accurate performance info that you can make real business decisions around when it comes to capacity planning. I think we're going to stop for our first poll question right now.
Yeah, David, thank you. So for those of you in the audience, we have a poll question up, and please feel free to actually click on the slide. It's interactive. We would appreciate your vote. But the question is, are you responsible for only this VMware environment? Your options are yes or no. So if you could take a second just to answer this poll question for us, that'd be great. Once again, are you responsible for only the VMware environment? We are getting a lot of results in so far, and I'll give you guys another second in the audience to answer the question. But we'll get some answers in there. But once again, are you responsible for only the VMware environment? And we have a unanimous decision, it looks like there, David. 100% say no. What are your thoughts on that?
That's actually kind of shocking, but actually strangely reassuring, right? So I kind of asked this question to help understand the audience. We're starting to see more and more that a number of organizations are making kind of a VMware-specific team who's responsible purely for the VMware delivery, right? So basically building a private cloud and running the applications off of that. And the experiences so far, at least in my discussions with users, has been pretty mixed on the actual effectiveness of that. All right, so it's good to see that the people in the audience are responsible for a bigger section of the environment than just VMware. It is very surprising to see that it's 100%, but that's great. All right, so let's move right along. So the second thing that I'll talk to users about who have this siloed monitoring approach and want to get better at service delivery is all around simplifying capacity management. As you're all aware, capacity management in a virtual environment can be incredibly complicated. There's no more physical boundaries around resource allocation. The idea that you could always depend on a certain amount of resources at a certain point in time is now completely lost. And I am talking to a lot of users who kind of look like this guy up on screen right now, who are just very, very confused about the whole process and about how to actually do basic capacity planning. And what I always find is that the users are generally far too focused on the specifics and getting lost and overwhelmed in the details. And something I try to reiterate is that simple capacity management, in order to get the majority of the value, it all boils down to three questions. What do I have in my environment? What am I using? And most importantly, when will I run out? And in a virtual environment, many data centers just aren't able to answer these basic questions, and they get very, very focused on troubleshooting VMware-specific issues. Right, we need to step back a little bit and look at these three basic questions, because you'll generally find that's where the majority of the value of the capacity management exercise comes from. So how do we do that? Or sorry, first of all, before I go on to the how, why is this capacity problem so important? And we talk to a lot of organizations that have basically become stalled on their capacity management process because of all those details. But when I talk to users, there's a few things we find. Why is capacity management so important? It tends to get pushed away or deferred or not actually be enacted in a number of data centers. When I talk to users, I find that about 65% of all help desk issues are related directly to some form of capacity issue. That's a huge number of help desk tickets. Right, we also find that about 30 to 50% of the cache resources are actually wasted in the environment. So either over-allocation of CPU or memory, I/O resources purely based around kind of fear of capacity spikes. Certainly SAN storage is immensely expensive and find that it'll be used in large environments for things that it just shouldn't be used for. And then there's the time and staff aspect of capacity management. So back to the 65% of tickets. We want to get away from managing all of those issues because, frankly, capacity issues can largely be avoided. Right? These are all problems that we could plan ahead for. So how do we actually do that planning ahead, and how do we simplify the problem enough that we can start on a proper capacity planning exercise? Sorry, just a problem with the slides there. There we go. So simple capacity management, there's a few high-level rules that I like to talk about. So first of all, don't confuse troubleshooting metrics for planning metrics. So there's a lot of discussion in the VMware environment around percent wait, percent ready, ballooned memory, command aborts, and metrics that are very, very deep into the VM and physical hardware level. But those really aren't planning metrics. If those metrics start to become a problem, it's more of a symptom of the planning issue beforehand, right? So if you haven't done proper capacity management, you would start to see some of these metrics go a little bit outside of the norm. So I always like again to say, step back a little bit. Start looking at 5 basic metrics: your CPU, memory, disk I/O, network I/O, and storage use. And try to look at those at aggregate levels, so at the pool or cluster level. Certainly at the application business service level, it's important to understand these things. Then those metrics are very easy to come by out of vCenter. But the key thing is to not link those metrics back to those lower level metrics, those problem metrics, but actually link them upstream, right, to actual business targets and service time targets. So for example, user interaction time, concurrent users. Focus capacity planning around task completion time, so number of orders processed. Maybe it's the search time on your website, or maybe the time to load a mailbox from a handheld client. Right? These are great user-focused metrics that you need to have a tool for that will actually measure these and then be able to correlate them back to those 5 basic capacity metrics we talked about. And then in the event that you do have a real capacity problem and you need to go into troubleshooting mode, you also want a tool that will give you percent wait ready, be able to link those metrics not just in the virtual sphere, but across to physical network application spheres as well. The third thing that I would talk to users about who are stuck in this position and want to do better with their VMware monitoring, it's all about moving from a reactive to a proactive approach. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you need to stop manually fighting fires so that you can really focus on those higher value tasks such as the planning and improving your service delivery. Right, from a performance point of view, this is very important. I find that the users who actually implement a basic form of incident management automation, right, where we will simply respond to basic outages with an automated task, it can lead to a north of 80% improvement in your mean time to repair. So from an impact to the business point of view, that is enormous, right? You can take all of that time that you'd normally spend simply triaging basic issues in the data center and focus more on those higher level tasks. Saves a lot of time and a lot of resources. So how do we do this? As soon as I talk about automation, there's a few different common barriers that always come up. So the first is loss of human intervention. So simply losing that comfort that knowing that somebody who is paid to deal with incidents is looking at a problem, triaging it, and resolving the issue. Or if we get back to the number of issues that are very basic, right, that can be avoided and more so self-inflicted, we don't really need to have that human intervention to resolve most of those types of problems. Another key thing that comes up is internal politics, right? So if we have an application that is very complex and it crosses many different servers or different components, anytime there's an automated action to try to manage that, or an automated action to manage that service, you can run into all kinds of politics around who controls what in the environment and who makes the decision on what the automation tasks should be. And again, that really comes back, how do we avoid these politics, to having that unified view, having a tool that covers all the different silos so that everyone's on the same page and everyone understands the impact of these automation tasks. And the third common barrier is all about testing time and overhead. Right, so simply having the tooling that will allow to execute some of these self-healing and automation tasks. And frankly, there's a lot of tools out there that do this, right? So there's free tools even from VMware, such as VMware vOrchestrator. Certainly Uptime, our tool, provides this as well. But you want to provide something that gives you all of the self-healing power, so the ability to detect a problem and trigger an action in an automated way, in addition to giving you all of the capacity info across all the components of your IT services and the troubleshooting info you need as well. So generally, to get started on this automation route, there's a few things that can be automated very easily with very low risk in the environment that will help to avoid some of these common barriers, and also help to kind of prove that the automation is actually working and be able to baseline as an organization with automation in place. What is the impact on our mean time to repair? What is the impact on service delivery? So what can you be automating, and what should you look at automating? The first is all about sprawl control. So any time that a VM is powered on or provisioned in the environment, it is very, very easy to trigger automated tasks that will basically validate that VM is within compliance for your corporate policy. So is it rolled out with the right amount of memory, right amount of CPU? Has it been deployed to the correct resource pool or DR environment? All of these tasks are simple checks and balances that an administrator would normally do on their own that can be fully automated. The second thing that's very easy to automate is application and VM recovery. And here we're talking more about at the guest level. Right? So a number of VMs are becoming more and more, it's becoming more and more common to deploy them as single service VMs. So you don't have a lot of VMs these days that are hosting 8 different applications on them. Right? They'll be single service VMs. So most application failures, it's very safe to simply restart the VM or restart the application within the guest OS using an automated script versus having to go and look at that problem on your own. Third thing that can be easily automated is all about resource allocation. Right? So this one can get a little bit tricky, but if you're having a real performance issue in a live environment, generally the triage steps to resolve that performance issue are going to boil down to a few things. Can we move this VM to a different resource pool? Can we increase its allocation of resources, give it more CPU temporarily? All of these things can be automated, right? There's no need for that to be a human task. Right? And I already kind of talked about the migrations factor. So can we simply move VMs around the environment in an automated way to ensure that load is balanced and service is maintained for the applications that are actually running on all of those VMs? I think we're going to stop for another poll.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, David. We have another poll question for you in the audience, so if you could take a second just to answer the poll question. But just a quick reminder that if you did have a question for our Q&A session, please feel free to enter your question anytime. However, I will read this poll question. Please feel free to interact with your slide on your screen. The question is, what is your timeline for moving to automated self-healing? Do you currently have no plans, 1 to 6 months, 7 to 12 months, 1 year plus, or already implemented? So if you could just take a second there, you could actually interact with your slide. You have the options of no plans, 1 to 6 months, 7 to 12 months, 1 year plus, or already implemented. And once again, the question was, what is your timeline for moving to automated self-healing? And we're going to push the results out here in a second. I'll give everybody a couple more seconds just to enter really quick. And we'll push the results out, and seems to be a pretty 50-50 kind of split between no plans and 1 to 6 months there, David. What do you think about that?
That's actually not bad. You know, I would hope to see that a number more would be in kind of the already implemented bucket. But certainly this speaks to some of the blockers to actually implementing the automated self-healing that I talked about before. Right, so certainly this is something that I think in the data center is being identified as a key area where service delivery can absolutely be improved, and the time to actually manage these problems can be reduced. So the value to the business is extremely valuable. But it's also very scary, right? So there's a lot of things that can be involved in the automation that really just present uncertainty into the IT environment. So we do find a lot of data centers are, kind of talking about this, something they want to look at, try and improve a concept to see if it really does improve services. Or, frankly, a lot of organizations are just kind of not ready to go there yet, right? Maybe they've got other kind of quick win problems that they can resolve to improve service delivery before getting to automation. And automation is something that would be out there in the, the 1 year plus kind of bucket. All right, so this has been a quick intro to 3 key topics or ideas and just tips to help you take your VMware monitoring to that next level, right? So to help you focus more on actually improving your service delivery through unified monitoring that covers the entire application stack and IT service stack versus depending on a group of individual silo tools or point tools to cover each area of the environment. So we talked about how to move beyond VMware's native monitoring with vCenter, how to simplify that VMware capacity management problem into the 3 simple questions of what do I have, how much am I using, and when am I going to run out. And I talked a little bit about moving towards that proactive performance management and the very, very powerful effects that can have on service delivery and improving that delivery in your environment. Now, of course, I am from Uptime Software, so I am going to say that absolutely Uptime as a product can help you with all of these problems, can help you deliver on the service delivery improvement promise that IT has to make to the business. We do have a free 30-day evaluation that I think is linked to within your console. We're going to pause now to answer some questions from the session. So, Chris, I'll actually pass it back to you to suggest some questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much, David. Thank you for your presentation. Just quickly, a couple people had a question in the Q&A area where they could reach Uptime on Twitter. I will show you that on this slide right here, you could actually contact David via Twitter if you had any questions. I'm sure he definitely wouldn't mind answering your questions. But you could also contact him via his email. And on the slide right here that I'll leave up for the rest of the webcast, you could learn more about signing up at uptimesoftware.com, and you could contact sales at uptimesoftware.com for any of your questions. So please feel free to use those resources to get more information. But if you do have a question, please feel free to enter it in the Ask a Question box for our Q&A session, and hopefully David will be able to answer everybody's questions. So we have a couple questions in here already for you, David. The audience has been asking them. The first question that we have is, how does Uptime trigger self-healing actions? Could you expand some more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. The self-healing engine in Uptime is designed to enable self-healing across a variety of different technology platforms, right? So Uptime is a unified monitoring tool, so we can do monitoring of the virtual environment, the network, application tier, databases, physical servers as well, so covering your Linux, Unix environments such as Solaris and AIX. And what we've built is a comprehensive library of kind of scripts and basic capabilities that will allow you to trigger different scripted events on each of those technologies, right? So a great example would be in a Windows environment. We could do something as simple as simply restarting a Windows service triggered from the uptime monitoring station via WMI, or we could launch a more powerful, more intricate PowerShell script that would take whatever actions you want to trigger on that host to recover the service. In the VMware environment, we actually interface directly with the VMware vCenter API to have access to every management function that it provides. And we also do integrate with the runbook automation program from VMware Orchestrator, which allows you to basically piece together very, very complicated runbook tasks that can be executed on demand in an automated way. Uptime can interface with that tool to trigger those types of tasks. For example, rolling out new VMs to handle capacity, deprovisioning VMs, or rolling out new vSphere hosts.
All right, excellent. Thank you, David. We have another question here for you. This is coming from Rick in our audience, and Rick is wondering, why are you better than VCOPS?
Really, it kind of depends tool by tool, right? So the strength of uptime and the kind of the core thing that we always come back to, right, is that we're able to provide about 80% of the value of any point tool, but we're able to cover all of the different silos within the environment, right? So covering all of those different technologies and getting into the Unix space, which a number of tools in our space don't get into today. That's some of the key power of uptime. And our ability to take all of that information, so across all of those different stacks, and roll it up into real business dashboards that allow you to display the status and health of your applications to various different audiences, right? So both the consumers of those applications, but also the administrators and the teams that are backing those applications. You have different customized views for the different teams and users that are involved in that.
Got a question for you. This comes from Anuj Patel in our audience. So thank you, Mr. Patel. We have a question, though. He's asking, what is the licensing model for VMware environment?
For uptime, the licensing model is based on per VM, right? So regardless of the architecture, the size, memory, CPU, the types of applications, all of that stuff, uptime is purely licensed on count the number of IPs in your environment, physical, virtual, and that's what you'll end up paying for from a licensing point of view.
All right, excellent. For those of you in the audience, if you do have a question, please feel free to enter your question in the Ask a Question box. We do have David here still for another couple of minutes, so please feel free to ask your questions to David. Just simply use the chat box on the left-hand side, enter your question in the area, and hit submit. It'll be sent off to us. So if you do have some questions, please feel free to fill that in. Question here for you in the audience, David. This person is asking, can you talk about deployment of uptime across across VMware and other platforms? Would you mind talking about that?
Yeah, certainly. So uptime is a tool we really do pride ourselves on ease of deployment. And a typical example I can give you is that a traditional tool like ours can really take months to roll out, involving professional services. Certainly for any of the framework or Big 5, Big 4 tools, it can take months and months to roll it out. Right? Uptime, on the other hand, we generally give an indicator that we can be rolled out to about 400 servers a day, and that's by a single administrator. Right? So using a combination of agent-based and agentless monitoring, we're able to rapidly monitor different types of environments. For example, the VMware environment, we will within a few seconds scan every single VM and every single host attached to a vCenter install and automatically start monitoring everything there using best practice monitoring. So that rollout would be simply a matter of seconds. So if you do install the evaluation, you can install it on your desktop or a test system, plug it into your vCenter, and within about 15 minutes you'll be monitoring everything there. For the other platforms, right, so Solaris, AX, HPUX, there is an agent that traditionally needs to be rolled out, or you can monitor those devices via SNMP. So it can be very, very quick to just roll out that lightweight agent or SNMP and pull back all the performance info you would need.
All right, David, we have another question here for you, and this person is asking, what about vCenter Operations Manager instead of vCenter?
Well, vCenter Operations Manager certainly is a step up from vCenter, and it does a pretty good job of kind of opening up some of those longer-term capacity metrics and the application metrics, right? But at the end of the day, it's not a tool that's always there in a VMware environment. It does have a very real cost and can get quite expensive to actually roll that tool out. And it unfortunately still doesn't do the kind of consistent job of getting in-depth metrics across all of the different components in your environment, across physical and virtual, and tying it all into one dashboard.
All right, excellent. If you do have a question for David, please feel free to enter it in the Ask a Question box on the left-hand side of your console. We do have a couple more minutes here with David, so if you do have a question for him, please feel free to ask it now. I got a question here for you from the audience, and this person is asking, asking if you could explain more about monitoring across multiple platforms with uptime. Could you kind of expand on that a little bit for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So the uptime monitoring platform will allow you to collect deep performance metrics from an array of different operating systems, right? So bringing in all the Unix, Linux platforms, the Windows platforms, VMware platforms, and do all of the basic, let's say, hardware and guest operating system level metrics, but then also add the value of monitoring the network, right, and monitoring the application stack, as well as monitoring the user experience across all of those different components, right? So using uptime, you can actually map out an IT service and measure the quality of service or user experience of the users accessing that application, and then be able to see what are the individual pieces across the environment. So maybe it's a database server that's on an AIX system, maybe there's some middle tier VMs that are running on VMware. You can view individual status and performance of all of those different components, monitoring very, very granularly individual processes that are running on the box. So if you wanted to check that the Apache server was up and running, you could monitor that on an individual VM. Take all of that information, tie it together into a business service. It will allow you to very, very quickly kind of traverse the topology of root cause across all those different platforms to figure out where a potential issue in the environment actually exists.
I got a question for you, and this comes from Stefano Busico. So thank you, Stefano, for your question. But he's asking, we can use uptime for VMware, Hyper-V, and Zen environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So uptime provides host-level monitoring of all those different environments, as well as gathering info from the guests under each of those virtualization technologies.
All right, excellent. Did you have any closing remarks that you wanted to leave the audience there, David?
No, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining me today, and I hope the information has been valuable. I know certainly the questions were great. And if you do have any further questions, feel free to use the contact info that's up on the screen at the moment, or hit me at my own email address or Twitter account, which is listed next. So thank you, everyone.
No, thank you very much, David, for your presentation. Excellent, and really appreciate you taking out your time and your schedule to join us for today's webcast. We really appreciate that. We'd both love to thank everybody in our audience for joining us and participating with us today in today's webcast. We appreciate your time today, so thank you all for joining us. Just a few quick reminders for those of you in our audience. If you feel free to share the link to the replay that will get in your email box within the next 24 to 48 hours. Share that link with coworkers and friends who may be interested. We do keep an archive of this webcast for 3 months on redmondmagazine.com, so please feel free to go back and sign up there and view the webcast in the future. But a big thank you for everybody for joining us for today's webcast. We really appreciate your time. Today's webcast, Taking Your VMware Monitoring and Capacity Management to the Next Level, has been sponsored by Uptime Software. David, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. And thank you all in the audience for joining us. And we hope to speak to you again soon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And you have a great day.
And again, that does conclude today's webcast. We thank everyone for participating today.